Hi, my name is Lyla and I'm the Mini Witch. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Mini painting can be a bit overwhelming, especially with so many paints and paintbrushes available. What brushes do you need? What makes a good quality paintbrush? What do you use these paintbrushes for, and how do you take good care of them once you have them? This week's video is the ultimate guide to paintbrushes. Let's start with the basics. What brushes do I think you need? What are they for? And how do you use them? The three brushes I recommend you start out with are a round brush, a detailed brush, and a flat brush. There are also a few other types of brushes that are handy to have, and we'll talk about those later. Round brush. A round brush is the most traditional type of brush. A round brush has a larger belly and the bristles come to a fine tip. This is your general day-to-day paintbrush. To achieve perfect and smooth application, you'll want the belly of the brush to be full of liquid, and you want to be working with thin down paint. The two ways you can fill the belly of your brush are either with water or with thin down paint. For water, dip your paintbrush into your paint cup or wet palette, wipe away the majority of it, and then dip it into your paint. To fill it with paint, just fill the paintbrush with your thin down paint. Once your paintbrush is filled with your liquid of choice and paint, test it on the back of your hand. If the paint pools off suddenly, either you have too much liquid in the belly or your paint is too thin. You want the paint to flow off your paintbrush as if it is an extension of your paint tip. If your paint stroke isn't smooth or you're having a hard time getting the paint off the brush, either the belly isn't full enough or your paint is too thick. In the beginning, test the consistency on the back of your hand frequently. You'll get used to it eventually and it'll become second nature. Ideally, you would have at least two round brushes, one larger and one smaller. Your smaller brush will be what you use on 28mm models, while your larger brush would be used for terrain, bus, vehicles, and other large areas. Working with the proper size paintbrush can save you a lot of time. My go-to smaller paintbrush is the Winsor Newton Series 7 Sable Hair Round Watercolor Size 1. The larger round brush I use is from Redgrass Games. Detail brush. A detail brush is just a far smaller round brush. This brush will be what you use to apply the highlights in the eyes or the glint off a belt buckle. If you have great brush control and a fine point, you can absolutely do these things with your larger round brush. But I have a hard time using the larger round brush because the belly of the brush always gets in the way for me. So I use a smaller detail brush. Now the same full belly applies for your detail brush, and it might even be more important. Paint begins to dry a lot faster in such a smaller paintbrush, so you need to have a full belly and work quickly. The detail brush that I go to is the Winsor Newton Series 7 Round Watercolor Brush Size 0. Flat brush. A flat brush has a medium length bristles and a square end. In miniature painting, a flat brush is most commonly used for dry brushing. Dry brushing is a way to paint only the raised edges of an area, usually done on terrain or large areas with raised textures like the scales of a large dragon. For this reason, you'll want your flat brush to be on the larger side. When dry brushing, I use paint straight from the bottle, or in general, thicker paint. Dip both sides of your paintbrush into your paint, wipe away the majority of it on a paper towel off to the side, and then quickly pull your brush back and forth over those raised edges. Dry brushing can be varied depending on the amount of paint you use and the amount of pressure you use when you're applying the paint to your miniature. More pressure will hit more of the lower recessed areas, while less pressure will hit only the utmost raised areas. I don't have a go-to flat brush, I just use this one that I got from the craft store when I first began painting. Since this technique is pretty rough, you don't really need a super high quality flat brush, so whatever you have on hand or whatever you can find from the craft store should be fine. Now onto the brushes that you don't need, but can be helpful. A liner brush. A liner brush is a thin brush with long bristles. These brushes hold a lot of paint and are great for adding lining to your miniatures. Because of their long, thin shape, they really aren't good for anything but lining, which is why they're in the optional section of this video. Liner brushes are similar to round brushes in that you'll want to fill the brush as well as use thinned down paint. Since there isn't nearly as much of a belly, you don't need to be as aware of the liquid in the brush quite as much, but I've just made it a habit of always filling my brush, so I do this with my liner brush as well. My go-to liner brush is the 000 liner brush from Artist Opus. A domed brush. A domed brush is a tightly packed brush with bristles cut into the shape of a dome. These brushes are used for dry brushing, as well as stippling. To dry brush, once again, you'll want to use thicker paint. Dip your paintbrush into your thicker paint, wipe away the majority of it, and use that same quick motion of pulling the brush back and forth over your raised areas, just like we did with the flat brush. And again, the more or less pressure you apply will determine the areas that you hit as well as the amount of paint you leave behind. What makes a domed brush better for dry brushing than a flat brush is that a domed brush doesn't leave directional stripes like a flat brush does. However, a domed brush is far more niche and harder to find, so that's why I've listed it after the flat brush. For stippling, you'll dip your brush into your paint and wipe away the majority, just like we did before. Then you're going to quickly tap the paintbrush against your surface you wish to paint. Like using a flat brush for dry brushing, the more pressure you apply, the more paint you'll leave behind. Stippling can be an easy way to blend large areas together in a rather rough gradation. Lastly, I also use my dry brush to apply my dry weathering pigment from Green Stuff World. I think that the dome brush disperses the pigments more evenly and gives a more realistic appearance. This domed brush is from Michael's craft store, but any domed brush, even a makeup brush, will work just as well. What do I do with my old brushes? Just because a brush is old doesn't mean it has lost its value. Old brushes can be used to mix paint, apply primer, base coat, and washes. Using your older brushes for the brunt work can help save your nicer brushes that have a fine tip for more detail-oriented applications. Quality. There are two types of brushes, natural hair and synthetic. Synthetic brushes have bristles made of man-made materials, like nylon or polyester. The downside of synthetic brushes is their longevity. Synthetic brushes have a tendency to begin to curve, and don't last nearly as long as natural hair brushes. I've had synthetic brushes begin to curve within a matter of hours of painting, all the way up to a week of painting, but no matter what, I've eventually been disappointed. That doesn't mean synthetic brushes don't have their place. The main thing is to avoid synthetic brushes for your liner brush, your detail brush, and preferably your smaller round brush. There are several different types of natural hair, but the most popular and highest quality is sable hair. Sable hair is great quality for brushes as the hair is extremely durable and soft, but they are more high maintenance. They should be stored with their tip in the downward position so that water and paint does not run into the ferrule of the brush. Of course, I don't take the best care of my brushes, so I don't do that. Brands I have tried. I have tried a handful of brushes with a myriad of success. My absolute favorite brush is understandably the Winsor Newton Series 7 watercolor brushes. If I had to start my collection all over again, the size 1 and 0 would be the ones that I would go out and get first. They last for months, probably longer if I actually took good care of them, and almost never lose their tip. These are my favorite go-to brushes and probably always will be. My second most used brush brand is Artist Opus. I had seen these advertised in Instagram and fell for the hype. I bought 2 of them for myself for Christmas last year, but honestly didn't fall in love with them as much as I was hoping I was going to. The brushes seem fine enough quality. I just have a spiritual connection with the Winsor Newton. I don't know, I just don't find myself gravitating towards them. But their liner brush is growing on me. A few paint brands that were pretty good but didn't beat my Winsor Newton were the Redgrass Games, Rosemary Co., and Raphael. Again, there was nothing wrong with these brushes, they just didn't beat my favorites. Brush care. Right, so I'm not very good at brush care, but by the end of this video, hopefully I and you will be better at it. First, you don't want to get paint into the ferrule of your brush. Doing so can warp your bristles as well as disintegrate the glue that holds your brush together. I'm not always the best at it, but it's something I'm working on. For maintenance cleaning, I use the Master's Brush Cleaner. To use this, get your brush wet with clean, lukewarm water. Then swirl the brush in the cleaner and swirl it on the back of your hand. I had always cleaned the brushes in the palm of my hand, but in doing research for this video, I found out that Winsor Newton recommends that you don't clean it in the palm of your hand because supposedly it can loosen the oils on your skin and those can once again get sucked up into the ferrule. Is this true? I don't know, but it's an easy enough thing to switch, so why risk it? Twirl the brush on the back of your hand to help it keep its shape. Secondly, you can push the soap through the bristles in a soft motion to try to once again pull away some of that built up paint. Now, doesn't the oil from your fingers suck up into the ferrule? I don't know, I'm just telling you what I read. For a deeper clean, I use Dawn dish soap, and I follow the process above. I try to deep clean my brushes about once a week. When you aren't using your brushes, ideally you would hang your brushes upside down. But as I said before, I don't do that. However, the most important thing is that you should never store your paintbrushes with the brush tip pointing up, because again, water, paint dripping into the ferrule. So what I do with the brushes that I really like is sort of compromise and just lie them on their side on their desk. You can tell what brushes I really love and treasure by the ones that are sitting horizontally on my desk. I hope that this video was useful and helpful to you. Let me know down below, what is your favorite brush? If you had to recommend a brush to me, what would it be? If you had to start your mini painting journey from scratch and needed to buy new brushes again, what would be the first ones you would purchase? If you like what I do here, you can support me on Instagram, Patreon, of course, as well as subscribing down below. All of the paintbrushes I've talked about will be listed down below. Some of them might be Amazon affiliate links, and if you purchase through them, I'll make a little bit of money. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this.